So good morning. We're so happy to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about effective co-teaching partnerships. We're going to look at our relationships. We're going to look at some co-teaching models or approaches, and we're also going to be talking about co-planning and co-assessing. My name is Chris Frawley, and I work at the TTAC at BCU. And my colleague Jennifer, I don't know if she's somewhere. Maybe she can. I can't see her, but if she can turn her camera on and she can maybe wave at you all and let you know who she is. That would be great. All right, so just to kind of get us started on the next slide here, if you will find your annotate tools, typically they're up at the top of your screen. They may be at the bottom, but if you can find them under options and go to the stamp tool. And if you don't mind just taking a look, and on this Monday morning at a little bit after 8:30, which one of these faces kind of represents how you're feeling this morning? And if you can't use your annotate tool, feel free to put it in the chat as well. So yeah, how are you feeling on this Monday morning? Oh, we've got some happy people. I'm actually number 4 as well. I'm feeling really good. Some are looking a little tired. I've got some 3s, a lot of 8s I see coming into the chat as well. Lots of 4s. Well, that's awesome. That's great. Yes, sometimes on a Monday morning, I'm feeling like at 8 as well. Oh, a lot of you are sharing in the chat. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So if we will clear the screen from our annotations, and we're actually going to go on to the next screen, and keeping your annotate tools out again. Let me see if it's possible. Can we clear the screen of all of our annotations? That would be helpful. All right. So thank you. All right. We just want to know a little bit about who's with us today. So on the first row, using those same annotate tools, if you're a general education teacher, mark that. Special education teacher, mark that. And then also on the second row, let us know, are you new to co-teaching? Have you never co-taught before and this is going to kind of be your first year? Or do you have some experience, whether it was 1 year, multiple years? It just gives us an idea of who's in the room today with us. So it seems like we have a balance of our general and education teachers. Oh, great. Thank you for also putting it in the chat. We appreciate that if you're unable to annotate. All right. We have a lot of people with experience. You have done some co-teaching previously. That's awesome. But we also have some new people here with us today. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. So it gives us an idea, once again, of who's in the audience. So as I mentioned on the next slide, these are the topics that we're going to cover today, kind of quickly in our session, but we are really looking forward to our time today. We're going to talk about relationships and the importance of our co-teaching relationships and some of the components of that. We'll take a brief look at the models or the approaches to co-teaching. We're also going to talk about co-planning and as well co-assessing. So when we take a look at our co-teaching relationships, and in this section today of our presentation, what we really hope that you walk away with is an understanding of the components of effective co-teaching relationships. And that's really important because the stronger our relationships are, the better that is not only for us, thank you, for us as co-teachers, but also as well for our students, because they're definitely going to benefit. And then at the end of our time in this section, I really hope that you're going to be able to kind of describe those 5 components of an effective co-teaching relationship, and then personally think about what your next steps are going to be. So when we hear co-teaching, we also hear the term collaboration. And I want to clarify the 2 terms, just so that as we're entering into our time together, that we have an understanding of both of them. When we're thinking about collaboration, collaboration is really how, as professionals, we work together. Jennifer, can you just click and it will come? Thank you very much. How professionals work together toward a common goal. It's very much the how. And when we think about collaboration, we don't have to be co-teaching to collaborate. And I know that you all collaborate a lot with others in your building all of the time, whether it's colleagues on a grade level or within a department. we're always collaborating, but we don't have to co-teach in order to collaborate. And then when we think about co-teaching is really a service delivery option, typically when we're thinking about our students with disabilities, right? Where we have two or more professionals, typically it's two, a general education teacher and a special education teacher, and they share the responsibility for a group of students, either all of the day or part of the day, because you both bring that expertise to really meet student needs. And we heard this earlier when we were kind of talking about inclusion and inclusive practices. Co-teaching is definitely, one of those aspects when we're thinking about inclusive practices and what we're here to talk about over the next 4 days. The co in co-teaching really refers to how the teachers are going to share many aspects of instruction and assessment and varied responsibilities within the classroom. So what we're going to do is just take a look at 5 components that really contribute to an effective co-teaching relationship. The first component that we're going to talk about, and this actually comes from Marilyn Friend's book, Co-Teach, and she talks about those co-teaching prerequisites. Like, what do we bring to the relationship? We bring our personal prerequisites, and those are our personal qualities that support our willingness to work with others. Are we willing to work together? Are we willing to give up control and actually share responsibilities? Are we willing to let go of the differences that we may have once we've addressed them and kind of recognize those differences and accept them and then learn how to just work together and moving forward? So what do we personally bring into that relationship? And then also she talks about the general professional prerequisites. In other words, our understanding of school and teaching and students. Do I understand my professional role as an educator? And then the discipline-specific prerequisites. So as a general educator, I come into that relationship as an expert with curriculum and instruction, classroom management, knowledge of my students' academic, social, and emotional development at whatever age or grade level that I'm teaching. I understand pacing with instruction. As a special education teacher, I come into the relationship as an expert in the process of learning, helping students learn how to learn, how to design and deliver instruction and services to really meet those individual student needs. I also know how to document and complete all of that required paperwork that we know comes with being in the field of special education and with our students with disabilities. And I also know how to focus on mastery of knowledge and skills with my students. So this is one of those components that is important when we're thinking about our relationship. And then the second component that we think about and is important is also a shared philosophy. So really, what are my individual core beliefs about teaching and learning? What are my beliefs about student behavior and grading, about our responsibilities together within that classroom? And it's really important that I understand those so that we can have a conversation about our differences and be able to discuss them in order to have a shared understanding. And that helps us in having that personal and a shared commitment to our co-teaching. Because if we approach instruction and addressing student behavior, for example, differently, then it's going to be really difficult for our students as well as our families, as well as us in the coming year. So really knowing those beliefs and really helping us as a team to develop that shared philosophy and understanding our beliefs as we move into this relationship together. So what I'd love for you to do is in the chat box, thinking about whether it's one of your core beliefs or one of the prerequisite skills or strengths that you have, name a strength or a skill that you bring to your co-teaching partnership. What is that? And just put it in the chat if you're comfortable doing that. What is a strength or a skill that you're bringing to your co-teaching partnership? Love of reading, knowledge of books and kids, flexibility. Oh, we love that flexibility for sure. Student relationships, behavior management, organization, respectfulness of other teachers, creativity, communication. Oh, we're going to talk about that very shortly. Math, behavior management, organization. Wow. You guys have a lot of strengths and skills that you bring to your co-teaching partnerships. which helps you then actually in being even stronger and more successful in this coming year. So I've talked about, like I said, the prerequisites, the co-teaching prerequisites, and I've also talked about shared philosophy. So what I'd love for you to do, if you're comfortable, you can unmute and chorally read this with me, or if you'd like to, you can stay muted and just read it out loud wherever you happen to be. But I've got a quote on the slide, and I'd love for you to read it if you're comfortable doing that with me. Okay? All right, let's go. The most
valuable resource that all teachers have is other.
Without
Collaboration, our growth is limited to our own perspectives.
Oh, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I put this quote up here because it's really highlighting collaboration. There was a 2015 study that indicated that the quality of teacher collaboration positively influences teacher performance as well as student achievement. When teachers engage in high quality collaboration, there is both an individual and a collective benefit. High quality collaboration is associated with increases in student performance, student achievement, as well as their peers' student achievement. So the third component of an effective co-teaching partnership is really a collaborative relationship. Just as I said, we know that high quality teacher collaboration can influence students' achievement and their performance. And it only makes sense that the strongest co-teaching is collaborative. As Marilyn Friend says in her book, it is a vehicle for accomplishing the work at hand. So what I've listed here on the slide are just some different things that we need to consider in that collaborative relationship. We need to have mutual goals for our students. We need to have parity, which means how do we communicate that to everyone that we are equal in our classroom and that we are equal in our expertise and that we share responsibility. And that our students see, as we're sharing those responsibilities, they see us as equals. Both names are on the door or on the board or on the roster, and that they see once again that we have that parity. And there's actually a handout in one of our folder, which is the fourth folder in that bit.ly, that you'll see that's on parity that you might have as a conversation with your partner. Are we willing to voluntarily do things to support our work together as co-teachers? Do we share responsibility for key decisions? Are we sharing the accountability for outcomes? And do we share resources? All of these factors contribute to that collaborative relationship, things that we need to be talking about, things that we need to ensure that help us in being collaborative. And I just mentioned talking. So another component and a factor of our collaborative relationship and being effective in our co-teaching partnership is communication. So the first thing we want to think about is how are we going to communicate? In other words, our skills. What communication skills do we have? Do we listen to each other? Do we ask clarifying questions? Do we really pause and think before we respond? Do we discuss and know how we're going to resolve our conflict with each other? Do we provide and receive feedback with each other? How are we going to communicate during instruction? What are those communication skills that we bring to the table? And reflecting personally on what are our communication skills? And then the basics of how and when are we going to communicate? Are we going to communicate before, during, after instruction? Are we going to communicate during the week, on the weekends, in the evenings, before school? And then how do we communicate via text, via email, on the phone, face-to-face? All of those basics we need to determine as partners what's going to work best for us. And then when we are communicating, what are all the topics that we need to discuss? I just shared a bunch of them with you on the first 2 or 3 slides here, all the different things that we need to talk about when we do come together. And when we're coming together, we're using our skills and we're talking about what we need to talk about, and we determine when we're going to do that because that's so important in our relationship. So on this next slide, I want you to just reflect a little bit using your annotate tools. Is this a true or false, or agree or disagree for yourself? Is communication an area in which you would like to grow? If that's a true, if you're feeling yes, I agree with that, you can put an annotate tool over there, or a disagree, you feeling pretty comfortable, or are you somewhere in the middle? And you can put that either in the chat or you can use it on the slide. Great. Some in the middle. We've got some that agree. It's kind of one of those things I'm always feeling like that's an area of growth for myself. I can always improve in that. All right, somewhere in the middle. All right, and then we've got our last one here. As a co-teacher, I'm comfortable discussing classroom management, parity, core beliefs, and other topics. Thinking about that with my colleague. How am I feeling about that? Oh, good. We've got a lot that are agreeing with that, having that comfort level. All right, great. Just a little bit of self-reflection when it comes to co-teaching. All right, so the last component we've talked about those prerequisites. We've talked about shared philosophy. We've talked about collaborative relationship. We talked about communication, and now we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities. So this is the fifth and final component. We want to be able to identify, know, and understand our roles and our responsibilities in that co-taught setting. And there are different individuals that are involved when we're thinking about co-teaching. For example, administrators. We have our administrators because they create those groups. They hopefully also are identifying time in our schedule for when we can co-plan. So our administrators, it's really important for them to be a part of this and to support our work together. And then also our roles and responsibilities as co-teachers, general and special education teachers. Some of these things I've already mentioned in previous slides. But we want to be clear on kind of what we bring to that partnership. What are our roles and responsibilities? Marilyn Friend actually mentions creating a Venn diagram. And in the middle of the Venn diagram, what are those things that we're going to share? What are the roles and responsibilities we'll share? But then what are those things that are really kind of more what the general education teacher is going to do, and one that the special education teacher is going to do, and when we're thinking about our roles and responsibilities. On the next slide, I've got a handout that I have shared with you in your folder. And this is just a handout that really is a launching place for you all to talk about your roles and responsibilities in the classroom. It goes through a variety of topics, whether it's planning, whether it's talking about assessment, grading, all of those different things. It goes through and kind of addresses each what the possibility of the role of the special education teacher is and the general education teacher. So I would encourage you to use this if you would like to have that conversation with your co-teacher in thinking about, how you might be able to, do these resonate with you, or are there some things that you might want to change that would best fit you all in your relationship? There's also a third column for the paraprofessional, because if you have a paraprofessional, having a conversation with your paraprofessional is really important, and ensuring that your paraprofessional understands his or her roles and responsibilities as well. So I've been talking a lot about these 5 different components. And what we're going to do is we're going to put you into some breakout rooms. If you visit the 4th folder in the bit.ly, and that's the one on our effective co-teaching partnerships, within there, we've got a co-teaching basics planning document. So you can either download it or make a copy for yourself. But when we get into our breakout rooms, we're just going to ask you to turn on your camera, unmute, and introduce yourself, kind of tell everybody who you are and kind of, where you're from, where you teach, and then share with the group, thinking about these 5 components, maybe what's 1 or 2 next steps that you've identified for yourself in any of those components that we've talked about related to co-teaching relationships. And then personally record them on your document, because we're going to continue to record on that document in our session this morning. So when we go on into our breakout rooms, I'm going to ask Allison if you'll put them into. Thank you. We hope that you had an opportunity to meet some other people and talk a little bit about kind of who you are and kind of where you teach, and also share with them some of your next steps in one of these 5 components when we were talking about co-teaching relationships. And if you're comfortable on sharing a reflective next step for yourself, feel free to put that in the chat. And so everybody can see that. And then we're going to kind of move on to the next section to just kind of keep rolling along here. The next topic that I'm going to talk about is models or approaches to co-teaching. And what I'm hoping for you all to be able to learn is those 6 models or approaches, as Marilyn Frum refers to them, of co-teaching. And that's important because we need to know what we're doing together when we're in the classroom instructionally, right? And there are some different ways that that can look. And really, hopefully by the end of this session, you can name the 3 frequently used co-teaching models, and then think about a model maybe for next year or maybe in the past year with your co-teacher that you could use to meet instructional needs of your students. So as we share this information, some of it you'll be able to use now, but some of it you'll be able to use as we are moving forward. On this slide, next, using your annotate tools again, these are the different models for co-teaching. If you are familiar with any of them, you've heard of them, or you've used them, if you don't mind just annotating on here, whether it's parallel teaching, station teaching, one teach, one observe, alternative teaching, team teaching, one teach, one assist. What are some of the ones that maybe you're familiar with or you've used yourself? And thank you for putting it actually in the chat as well. We really appreciate that. Nice data collection for us. Right. We see a lot of you, there are a lot of them that you're very, very familiar with that you have used. That's awesome. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to go on ahead and talk about the different models. I'm going to preface, before I start talking about the 6 models, the 6 approaches to co-teaching, preface it with that they all need co-planning, every single one of them. And Jennifer's actually going to talk about co-planning shortly. So if you can go back to the next previous slide, Jennifer. Thank you. There we are. Great. I really appreciate that. So the first model, the first approach to co-teaching is parallel teaching. And this is when teachers are in the classroom and they are both teaching the same content at the same time to smaller groups, which is typically like half the class. We've split the class in half and each of us has half of the class. Both of the teachers are responsible for the content knowledge, which is why when I mentioned that co-planning, why it's so helpful. Some of the strengths, we've got smaller groups of students, a greater opportunity to manage classroom behavior or the behavior of our students, as well as student engagement. Some of the drawbacks, both of us need to be very comfortable with the content and with the instruction of the content. And our pacing has to be the same. So if we're given each 20 minutes to do this in our groups, we need to make sure that we're actually going to get it done in that 20 minutes, right? So we've got to make sure that we are with our pacing. But this is one that we want to use frequently. Another one that we want to use frequently is station teaching. And with station teaching, typically there's like a minimum of 3 stations. Usually each teacher is at a station, and then there is a 3rd station, could be a 4th, but typically it's a 3rd station where it's independent. The students are going to be working independently. And the students rotate from station to station throughout this model. What's really nice about it, there is increased instructional intensity because we have much smaller groups, even smaller than when we're parallel teaching. The teachers and the students are engaged, and it also provides the teacher an opportunity to do some more individualized instruction with that small group that we know has specific needs. Some of the drawbacks is, once again, I talked about that pacing needs to be the same, but we have to ensure when we do station teaching that we have actually taught our students what it looks like to be at that independent station and what it looks like and sounds like to do that independent work. What does it look like to transition from station to station? What is the noise level going to be? What are we going to do during that independent time? So it can be a little challenging if we haven't taken the time to actually teach that to our students, model it, and give them a chance to practice it. But station teaching is another excellent model for us to be using, and once again, requires quite a bit of co-planning for us to do. Another one that we would like to use frequently is one teach, one observe. But we're going to use it pretty much for brief periods of time. And the purpose of this model is really data collection. And that data collection really supports us in making decisions that are based upon data. We can use that. One teacher is actually teaching the whole group, and then the other teacher is observing, meaning that teacher may be walking around the classroom collecting data on students' mastery of a skill, of content, Or the teacher might actually be supporting her colleague when she is learning something new and, professionally. So maybe they're doing the framing routine, which is a strategic, from the strategic instruction model. It's one of their content enhancement routines. And that teacher is up there and she's teaching the framing routine. And the other teacher who's observing is going through and ensuring that that teacher has done the cue step, everything under cue and do and review when we're doing the framing routine. And so that's a way that that professional can actually support another professional within the classroom. But mainly this is data collection. And so one of the drawbacks is it's limited in its use because really we're not so much instructing as much as we are data collecting. And we have to really agree upon what's important, the data that we need to collect and what is important for that. Another model, which we're going to use occasionally, is alternative teaching. And in this model, one teacher has most of the students, while the other teacher is working with a small group of students. The other teacher who's working with that small group of students, has a smaller, teacher and student ratio. It provides an opportunity to pre-teach, to reteach, enrich, provide remediation, all of those things with that small group of students. And it also can help us be more targeted in our instruction with that small group and supporting those individual needs. Some of the drawbacks, though, is that we had to be really careful about it not being the same group of students that's always going with the teacher in the back of the room. Is it always the same group of students? The students with disabilities are always the ones that are going to the back of the room when we're doing alternative teaching. So we want it because then it becomes very negative in their thought. It's like, oh, it's always me that's going back there. So that group should be flexible based upon students.
Really drop the ball on this.
Okay. The next one that we're going to take a look at is team teaching. And with team teaching, this is another one that we're going to use occasionally, just seldom. That's when we're both up in front of a whole group. So once again, we don't have that instructional intensity that we may do with some of the other ones. It does offer an opportunity for students to really kind of see varied strategies and points of view from both of our teachers. It provides an opportunity for us to have, as teachers in the front of the room, pretty active, but maybe different roles. So I'm going to go back and to, an example that I was using earlier. I talked about the framing routine, but maybe we're going back through and I'm teaching vocabulary. So I'm teaching vocabulary to my students, and maybe the other teacher is filling out the Frayer model with the students and modeling that for the students as I'm going over and instructing the vocabulary. So we each have active roles in the front of the classroom. One is actually maybe doing the instruction while the other one's kind of showing a strategy for the students that we've been using in class. Once again, some of the drawbacks, whole group, it really decreases the instructional intensity, and we've got to be very comfortable in that when we're doing team teaching, and it can't be on the fly. This requires co-planning like all of the other models. I can't walk in and go, oh yeah, hey, we're doing fractions today. Yeah, I can just do fractions with you. We have to plan this if we're going to use this model. And once again, thinking about why we're doing that, and how often we're using it. And then the last co-teaching model or co-teaching approach is one teach, one assist. And this is one that we want to use seldom. Unfortunately, we kind of use it a lot, but it really needs to be used seldom. And that is when one teacher is in the front of the room teaching the whole group, and the other teacher is just walking around and monitoring the students, providing them individual support during that instruction. You might also be providing some kind of differentiation. A lot of times the special education teacher is the one who ends up in the role of assisting the other students, and is then perceived as just more of an assistant as opposed to a teacher. And we're both teachers in that classroom. We're both professionals. And so there might be times when we will use this, maybe in the middle of a lesson and somebody's teaching and I'm going to go around and monitor, but then we're going to come back and we may use another co-teaching model or approach during that lesson. It's not to say that we don't use it, but we should use it seldomly. And if we're going to use it, thinking about how and why we're using it, because there are other co-teaching approaches that can be a lot more effective instructionally in meeting our students' needs. So what I'd love for you to do right now is go back to that co-teaching basics planning document. It's in the bit.ly. If you go to that fourth folder on effective co-teaching partnerships, and if you click on that folder, it should be kind of sitting on the outside with our PowerPoint presentation. Either make a copy or download it. And thinking about these co-teaching models and approaches, what might be a next step for you? Is it to talk with your partner next year if you're working with the same partner and let's try this one that we didn't try before? Or is it, I've got a great handout in the folder as well. Is it reviewing that handout and really getting a deeper understanding of the different co-teaching approaches so that you have that understanding of each one? So when you sit down and talk with your partner, you can think about which one's going to best meet the instructional needs of your students. Is it just being willing to try one of them? Whatever that is, just write down a next step or two and put that on that document. And as you are doing that, Jennifer and I are going to transition so that I can share my screen and start supporting her as we go into co-planning. So we'll give you a minute or two to just jot your thoughts on your next steps for the models of co-teaching, or if you want to go back and think about something with your effective co-teaching relationships. And then I will start sharing. Can you see that, Jennifer?
Yes, I can see it. It looks great. Thank you so much, Chris. All right, so the next part of our presentation is going to be on co-planning and giving you some more information about co-planning because it's an essential component to co-teaching. And if you don't have any co-planning, then your true co-teaching isn't really possible. Both teachers need to be very intentional about what and how and why we make the teaching decisions that we do so that we can create the best possible outcomes for our students. So I'm going to go over some key ideas around co-planning, including the different levels of planning and why they're important together and on their own. And because we know that planning time is crucial, but it's really hard to come by, we're going to think about some creative solutions for scheduling this planning time. So after the session, you should be able to describe the levels of co-planning, explain your role in it, and follow the steps for efficient planning. The essential question of co-teaching is, how is what we are doing together substantively better for students than what one of us would do alone? So this question puts into perspective why we co-teach. The premise of co-teaching rests on the shared expertise that the special educator and the general educator collaboration brings into the instruction, not just having two adults in the classroom. And if we're not co-planning, we tend to teach without any differentiation strategies, and we resort to that one teach, one assist paradigm that Chris was talking about earlier. Without time for the general and special educator to share their expertise with each other, they often just teach a class the way they've always taught it, and then there's no value added by the second professional educator. So what's planning like for your team? Do you have time to share ideas with your teaching partners? So would you please just take a moment and use your annotation tools to put a stamp on the box that describes your team's planning time? So it kind of ranges from you've never had a chance to plan together to your administration puts a high priority on it, and co-planning is something that is built into your day. It's interesting. So we have some of all of the different ranges. All right. So some people haven't had any time to plan together. Some people have a high priority placed on it, which is awesome. Some people are just planning together digitally. Some are pretty sporadic, which makes makes sense because our time has been really uncertain the last year. All right, thank you so much. Right, so as you can see from all their different responses, scheduling time for co-planning is pretty challenging, especially if you've been the one who has to find that time on your own. And especially if you have to meet with multiple co-teachers. So sometimes you're not just meeting with one person, you're meeting with several different people. So let's talk about some possibilities that have worked for some who didn't really have that built-in time. So if you don't have that shared time during the day, you can talk with your administration for some possibilities like compensation for planning outside of your contract hours. One thing you can do is to see if you can receive pay for your off-contract work. And while this may be a little unlikely, it has worked for some, especially in smaller divisions. You may also receive professional development credit for accumulated work over a year, and comp time can be an option sometimes. Your district might allow co-teachers to be exempt from some of the professional development activities. So on teacher work days, maybe you can use some, grab some time for co-planning rather than attending a different professional development. Or sometimes subs can be hired to cover co-teachers' classes so that you can allow the teachers a day or a half a day to do some macro planning. We'll talk about macro planning in a second. Or maybe you can coordinate staff schedules. So somebody who has planning time can cover your class so that you can co-plan with your co-teachers. And the next slide's got a few more ideas for co-planning. I'm not going to read all of them, but I mean, these are some ones that can work. One popular one is to coordinate your schedule so that instructional assistants or paraprofessionals can monitor your students while you're in the room. And so you and your partner can be at a back table, but your paraprofessional is monitoring the students. So this gives you a chance to work, maybe a little bit interrupted, but it's better than nothing. You can also speak to your administration about eliminating something like hall duty or hall monitoring or lunch duty if you have that, so that you can focus on co-planning. I know I worked at a school one time where we had recess, and during recess that was covered so that we could do some co-planning. Okay. Next, these are some co-planning meeting agendas. So after you've determined what regular times you're going to be planning with your partner, you can find some resources in the participant resources folder to give you some ideas for examples for meeting agendas. And a meeting agenda is just really helpful for keeping you focused and to keeping you on task and thinking about what you need to be talking about and not getting off topic. So you can use one of these, or you can adapt it, change it to just so it will meet what you need. So the agenda on this page designates 60 minutes for planning. So you and your partner can talk about the things that need to be talked about for upcoming lessons. So the left shows a description of what you might include in your discussion. So it talks about the data, curriculum, specialized instruction, how you're going to approach the lesson, and then a little bit of time is left for talking about your partnership and your relationship with each other. So these brief times allotted means that you have got to be prepared ahead of the meeting so that you can talk uninterrupted. The time allowed for discussing your partnership is really important for keeping your communication honest and running really smoothly. So next, what are these levels of co-planning? So we've got 3 different types of co-planning. First, there's macro co-planning, macro planning, and that's something that you would do every few weeks, maybe every 3 to 6 weeks. It could be once a quarter. It kind of depends on how you like to plan. And so this would be just an overview of your upcoming topics, your projects, the activities, materials that you might need to secure in advance, that kind of stuff. Meso planning, or just weekly planning, is probably the most common. And this is the planning that you do to break down your lessons that go with your units. So this would be planning for the specific activities and instruction that you're going to do each day, and the co-teaching approaches that you're planning to do. And then finally, there's this little extra kind of planning, the micro planning. So this is just touching base during the day. It's just a quick chat in the hall, or maybe a short discussion while students are working independently. It might be a quick review of an exit slip or something to discuss what you're going to need to hit for topics for the next day. So you can do all of these in person, or you can do them virtually, but most of your planning sessions should be synchronous. Most sessions should not be just a communication while you're not both right beside each other or working virtually. You need to use an agenda or a planning protocol so you can save time, and it'll help you to create a punch list or a to-do list of things that you need to get done. So I know this routine may sound like it's a lot, but it gets so much more efficient the longer you work together as a team. And you get more skilled and more focused in really quite a short period of time if you're following that routine. So before you co-plan, each teacher needs to make most of your shared time by doing some pre-work independently. And here your roles come in. The general education is going to review the topics, the projects, and the activities for the year or for the week. And you might have some division pacing guides that lay out all of this for you. But if you don't have one, then before school starts, you just take a blank calendar and pencil in all of your curriculum objectives that you need to your topics really, that you need to cover, and kind of determine how long it's going to take for each thing. So for example, you might say that you're going to spend 3 weeks reviewing fraction topics. The special education teacher has a job also, and unfortunately this isn't something that can be produced ahead of time by a division, so you will do this on your own. You're going to consider all of your students' IEP goals and how and when these are going to be addressed during the year. So when are you going to cover fractions? Does your student have specially designed instruction that needs to accompany the instruction on fractions? So you could perhaps create a spreadsheet and have a tab for each student, and then have like a little summary of each student on that spreadsheet. So each sheet you might have their students' goals, some of their unique characteristics that are going to require that SDI. Do they have memory issues, and how would you address those with specially designed instruction? You might find this kind of stuff in the psychological report. And just may also be in other places within the student's file. The special education teacher needs to then map the specially designed instruction, the accommodations, and any kind of special materials or manipulatives or things like that that you think you might use during the year. And you're going to map that to the general education teacher's pacing guide. So during planning, what's going on? You're going to follow your agenda, and you're going to stick to your times and your topics. Use a you can use a lesson planning template that you can both access and edit. This is really helpful. It's much more difficult to have a paper copy because this is something that you would like to share so that you can communicate with each other about any changes or additions that you're making. There is in your participant resource folder, there's a weekly planning template. Marilyn Friend has designed this, and it includes just about everything that you might want to know for a weekly lesson. So it's going to have, I'll show you a picture of it in just a second. The general education teacher during this meeting is going to be the expert on the curriculum and the content, and the special education teacher is going to be focused on the specially designed instruction that needs to happen. Both of you will analyze your data and discuss the implications for that, and you're going to talk about the gaps or the progress that's being made by all the students. And then together you're going to brainstorm and make decisions about the roles that you need to take during the lesson. So which types of which co-teaching model you might use, and how you're going to plan for the instruction that will happen there. Then you're going to gather your materials independently, and then make sure that you're both clear on your content and your purpose for that lesson. So this is the co-planning template that I was talking about earlier, and it is in your resource folder. You just can make a copy of it, and you can add or edit it as you like. And so it's a spreadsheet format, and it shows all of your lessons components right here. So it's got your objectives, your activities, assessment, your co-teaching approaches, your SDI, and what materials you need. So here you can just link those things into your document, and you can have them right at your fingertips. Just makes everything so easy. Both teachers can be familiar with all of the materials. I just think this kind of lesson planning is awesome. It helps you to maintain clarity about who's doing what and when. This will be in your participants folder under I think co-planning, the co-planning folder within there. There's also some other ones that are not spreadsheets in case you're interested in those. So after you finish co-planning, you need to stay in contact with each other. You need to, perhaps you can share your electronic lesson plan documents, your files, and your grading platforms. It's really important that the special education teacher and the general education teacher can both access the grading platform so that you can both enter grades or check on grades and that kind of thing. Both teachers will prepare for their own instruction that they will deliver during the lesson, and you need to let each other know if there are any necessary changes, and try not to make any on-the-fly kind of changes unless it's super and unavoidable. It's really difficult to execute your lesson if there's some changes that you weren't aware of. It sometimes will happen, but it shouldn't be the rule. A lot of times special education teachers have a really rigid schedule, and you have to teach more than one grade level or subject area, and so you're not able to make any accommodations to change the routines. And you know, sometimes general education teachers are planning together. They make a decision that's great for the grade level, but it doesn't necessarily work for co-teaching. And then you're going to evaluate your student outcomes and then take notes. Bring those back to your next planning session. If you have to make any adjustments, then you talk about that before your lesson. So next, Wendy Murawski has come up with 10 different keys to efficient co-planning, and I have a link to, not a link to the article, but a note about the article here. So we've really discussed most of these already, but I just wanted to reiterate a couple. So we want to remember that planning time's not a gripe session. So if you need venting time, then save that for a different time of not during your planning session, because you want to keep that time pretty sacred. Do your planning somewhere where you're not going to be distracted. So don't do it maybe in the lunchroom or the teacher's lounge where everybody's congregating. See if you can find a place where there's not going to be people to ask you questions. If you can put your phone away for 60 minutes, that would be fantastic so that you can really focus and get everything done. When you do that, then it improves your ability to stay on task together. All right. So next, Allison, if we can place everybody back in their breakout rooms. When you go into your breakout room, you are going to record and share your responses to these questions. What creative ideas do you have for scheduling your specific co-planning time? And what template do you think will be the most efficient lesson planning template or agenda that you can use with your co-teacher? I'm going to place in the chat a link to this breakout room document so that you can have that while you are in your breakout rooms. I think maybe 5 minutes to access your document and make a couple of plans for next year about some of the things that you will talk about with your co-teacher to help solidify your relationship with each other. So in summary, just wanted to say while you're co-planning, consider using an agenda to facilitate your discussion. And make sure that you have established your unique roles that each of you will fill. You don't want to both be doing the same job. There should be a difference between the two of you in the classroom. You want to try to create your lesson planning forms that are going to meet your needs, and be prepared whenever you come to your meeting so that you're ready and that you are able to stay focused. So the next part of our discussion today will be on co-assessment. So co-assessment in the co-taught class is something that is an important topic, and it's a little bit different than assessment in a general class with just one teacher. So I'm going to go over the different types of assessment and ways to go about co-assessing so that you can make the most of having two teachers in your space. And you'll know that you've learned this information if you can explain the different types of assessment and be able to pick out factors that may determine which co-assessing model to use. So co-assessment is a collaborative process. It's the collaborative process of collecting data on student performance to inform your instructional decisions. It's your opportunity for co-teachers to share responsibilities of assessment and for grading. The purpose is to collect data and to make instructional decisions for differentiation and for your specially designed instruction. So both the general educator and the special educator are involved in planning for, collecting, analyzing, and reflecting on all of this data. It's got to be intentional, and it requires active involvement of both teachers in the planning of it, the implementing of it, and for evaluating your products. It should result in more accurate data than one teacher can collect alone. So what are the different types of assessments? What kinds do you need? So that you can inform and evaluate your instruction, you need to complete formative and summative assessments. You'll find lots of examples of ways you can assess students in the participant resources folder. It is, there is a document on 25 different ways, formative assessments, and then there's some other ones that just kind of give you some ideas, but many, many, many different ideas for formative assessments. So formative assessment is that assessment that takes place during or before instruction. So you might have observations or homework, your review questions, class discussions, exit slips, electronic quizzes, question and answers. So lots of different things that will inform how you address your next lesson. So formative assessment is for that. Also, special educators are going to have to supplement classroom assessment with other assessments, and these might include things like monitoring your duration of attention, student callouts or student engagement, how many times they raise their hands, that kind of stuff. And so these types of data are important for special education teachers in order to accelerate student learning. In summative assessment, this is the kind of assessment that takes place after learning's been completed to determine how well the students have learned the material. It's information that provides feedback and sums up the teaching and the learning process. So it helps you to determine the progress the students made, but also lets you know the effectiveness of your instruction over a period of time. These are things like exams or benchmark tests, your term papers or essays, projects, portfolios, performances. In addition to all of those, the special education teacher still may have to do some more summative assessments so that you can determine progress on IEP goals. So this infographic is the co-assessment cycle. It shows the steps that you need to take to learn about your students' progress in relation to your instruction. So both teachers are active in each part of this cycle. So in co-planning, this is the part where you're choosing and creative, formative, and summative assessments for your students' needs and aligning the assessments with the curriculum and the IEP goals. And this is something that you do in your lesson planning process. Co-collecting data is the administering of the assessments and gathering all of the data. Co-analysis is when you are both together looking over your student work and determining the strengths and the areas that might need to be retaught. Using item error analysis is really helpful for helping you to determine where students are having misconceptions. Co-reflection. So this is where, as a team, you are looking over your analysis and deciding on what you will do next. Are you going to try an intervention? Will you reteach? Will you move faster in your pace or of your instruction, or to slow down? And then you start over again with your co-planning. So reflection comes along with co-planning, so you can do it at the end of one session, at the beginning of another, but it all happens as a cycle. There is a document in your participant resources called a 5-step protocol, and that can help you to go through these steps in more detail. So now you're ready to assess your students as a team. So there are 3 models of co-assessing that are based on the co-teaching models that Chris was talking about earlier. These assessment approaches represent best practices in collaborating so that you can co-assess your students. These models allow for differentiation according to your students' needs. So first, there's 1 monitor and 1 assess. And so this may look a little familiar, may look like the 1 teach, 1 observe kind of, or the 1 teach, 1 assist model. So one teacher will administer the assessment to the class as a whole, while the other is floating to monitor and answer any questions. So a time when you might want to use this is for something like a spelling test or a test that requires an oral administration of different prompts. So if you're calling out something and students are supposed to respond, this may be a time that you would use this. It's something that you will use infrequently. And if you had to do it virtually, then you can give the instructions for the assessment and both teachers would monitor the class as the students are taking the test. The next model is 1 teach and 1 assess. So here, one teacher is administering an assessment to a small group while the other is providing instruction to the larger group. And so this might look a little bit like alternative teaching. So you might want to use this approach when you have students that need the test read aloud, or if you have makeup tests for students who are absent, or if you have resources that you need to use during the test that are limited and so you need to share them, so you might just do 1 group at a time, or for providing students extra time according to their accommodations. So this is such a versatile model that is one that you would want to use frequently. Of course, it depends on your students' needs and how your classroom goes. The next one, the last one that we're going to talk about today, is divide and assess. And so this one kind of reminds me of station teaching, where you have both teachers are assessing a small group, and then other students are working on a different activity, academic activity at their table. So they might be working independently, or they may even be working as in small groups or partners while you're doing your assessments. You might do this in different classrooms if you had to, but it can also be something that you can work with your students to teach them how to work in groups like this. So you might want to do this when you're doing progress monitoring tasks, maybe a fluency assessment or something where you need to support students if they need help with instructions, or you suspect they're going to need help with instructions, or if they need help maintaining focus, or if there's something that you need to observe them doing, some kind of task that you need to observe. This is something that you can use frequently depending on your students' needs, and it's often is something that's necessary for accommodating students that need small group assessments. All right, the next part are some do's and don'ts for co-grading. So co-grading is your opportunity to share your perspectives with a special educator and general educator about student work, and to establish common notions for the criteria that are going to be needed for success. Talking together about your expectations for students is important because you need to make sure you have a common goal and a common understanding of what your students are going to need to show to demonstrate success. So you have to agree on what success is, in other words. You can divide up your tests or projects or writing assignments for grading, but consider calibrating your grading practices. So if you're going to be using a rubric, you need to talk together about how you're going to grade each component. What specific responses are you going to be looking for? And what are essential parts that need to be included in that response? Under what circumstances, if any, are you going to give partial credit? So you want to make sure that students have an equal opportunity to be graded with equity in your classroom. And so that's something that needs to be planned and discussed ahead of time. All right. So finally, co-teachers need to discuss their assessment and their grading philosophies and decide on their roles and their assessment responsibilities. Chris, you can go on. Yeah, thanks. Go on to the summary. Be sure to do it all with intentionality, choosing your assessments so that they match your students and match your curriculum and your instruction. And both teachers are actively involved in each part of that co-assessment cycle. So we want to make sure we're maintaining parity there to keep everybody on the same page. Finally, if you could refer back to your co-teaching basics planning document again and record your next steps in your co-assessment section. So some things you might think about recording here are, what are some things that you'd like to discuss with your co-teacher regarding co-assessment or co-planning? Your personal philosophy when it comes to grading practices, like what do you believe? And how do you know when your students have mastered a concept? So these are just some kind of thought-provoking questions to talk about with your partner so that you can come to a shared understanding about how you're going to move your students forward quickly and efficiently. So I'll just give you a minute to jot down a couple of those things. And while you're doing that, does anyone have any questions or about anything that we've gone over today?
I do. I would love for you to give an example of the grading practices. And let's just say I had a student who, let's just say we had an assignment that had 10 questions on it, modifying it for students who can only get through 5. How does that work? Do we roll over the next 5 questions for the next couple of days for that student, or can they still receive 1 through 5 as 100%?
So that is something that you come to an agreement with your co-teacher, and it definitely depends on the student and on what their abilities are. I mean, of course, it's ideal for students to be able to finish a complete assessment. Maybe extending it over a week would be good, and maybe that student can not necessarily have to do some other assignments, maybe a warm-up or something. They are continuing to work on the assessment during the warm-up time, so maybe they can be excused from a different assignment. But those are just parts of that coming to a common agreement about what you would like your class to look like and how you want grading to look.
No, that's perfect. You gave the perfect example of even just making sure maybe you gave them a time frame to complete it and won't require them to do, fractions 2.2, quiz, because they're still working on 1.5, but the grading scale will still allow them to, have the same outcome as the other students.
Exactly. Yeah,
okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Chris, are you ready to do the Menti?
Yes, I'll go on to the next slide. And I'll put it in the chat as well. So we would just love for you, after spending almost 90 minutes with us this morning, talking about the basics of co-teaching. We've talked about co-teaching relationships. We've actually talked about the models of co-teaching. We've talked about co-planning and co-assessing. So we would love for you to visit menti.com. You can go use your phone and use the QR code, or you can actually, I put it in the chat as well as it's on the slide, because I'm going to go away from this presentation in just a minute. But what word comes to mind when you think of co-teaching after just our time together? What is the word? I think I may have given you an opportunity to give more than one word to respond to in the Menti, but what's a word that comes to mind when you think about co-teaching? And we're just going to build a little bit of a word cloud. So I am going to stop sharing this one, and I'm going to go back and get out of here and bring this up. Oh, wow. Look at you guys. Let me see if am I sharing? I may not be sharing. I don't think I'm sharing yet. Here they are. Here we go. Look at everything that's coming through. We see collaboration right there in the middle, right? Partnership, communication, a lot of planning, team. And that collaboration goes along with everything that we talked about today, all of the different topics. You've got to collaborate in order to co-plan. You've got to collaborate in order to co-assess. In talking about the whatever instructional approaches you're going to be using together in the classroom, partnership, intentionality, time management. Yeah, Jennifer gave a great example of, if you've only got 30 minutes, here's an agenda. How are we going to best use those 30 minutes, right? So coming with an agenda and knowing what we need to talk about and assigning some time to that makes it really helpful. And she's got some great examples in that co-planning folder as well. Success. I saw inclusion, discussion, partnership, planning, flexibility. That's another good one that's coming. We are going to have to be flexible with each other as we're working as partners. Absolutely. Very much so. Well, I will allow you to keep looking at that. And I think we have one more slide, don't we, Jennifer?
I believe so.
I believe so as well. So let me stop sharing and then I'll bring that back up again, because I'm not so sure I can transfer over to that. And let me share. There we are. There we go. Thank you for participating. We appreciate that. Great ideas. Awesome word cloud.
And I just really love this quote. So individually, we are one drop, but together we're an ocean. So sharing teaching responsibilities can really magnify our effect on students. And that's just why co-teaching is such a powerful tool. It's hard to come to an agreement, but it's so worth it to work together, to make your compromises, and to have that shared philosophy when it comes to instruction, when it comes to grading, when it comes to assessment in general. That coming to that consensus and that communication, developing that trust, there's just nothing better. It's a wonderful relationship. It's a great way to teach, and students are the beneficiaries of it.
And just a reminder, we have a lot of resources in our folder, so feel free to use that. And we are going to turn it back over to Kristen, Kim, Teresa, whoever we need to pass it back to.
Thank you so much, Chris and Jennifer. You gave some amazing information and resources, and I'm sure everybody will really enjoy being able to use a lot of the stuff that you have in the folder. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Before you guys take your break, I just wanted to quickly address some of the comments and questions that were in the chat in the beginning during the opening presentation when we did the activity on the least restrictive environment. Just wanted to clarify a few things. There was a question about whether the percentages were different during the COVID situation, and no, those percentages were the same. And it would just be, that if the school was doing a virtual situation, it would be a percentage of the virtual school day as opposed to face-to-face school day. There was a question about why there wasn't an indicator for the percent between 40 and 80% as far as students who are receiving their education between 40 and 80% of the school day. And it's not that we aren't looking at that, but that is not a category that we actually have to report to the federal government. And then there was a comment as far as would these goals or targets pressure the IEP team in making decisions, because, you know, we have these goals to have the least restrictive environment. And no, I do not think it would pressure the IEP teams, because ultimately we know that the IEP team decides on and makes decisions based on what those students' needs are. You know, individual education plans are based on individualized needs. So that, of course, is at the forefront of any decision that an IEP team makes. But also keeping in mind that we do want to make sure we're educating our students in the least restrictive environment possible, and that students with disabilities very much benefit from being included and being taught with their age and grade peers. I think that was pretty much most of the comments and questions, and I know Teresa Lee addressed several of them in the chat as well. But if anybody wanted to talk about any of that, or had any questions about the first session, you do have a break until 10:30.